Hey, I'm Alex from Los Angeles.
I'm Karan from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self discovery through a shared love of film. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite films. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you, just the way we've been to us as well. So, with that said, Alex, what is our topic today? What are we getting into?
Yeah, so today we're getting into love. Now it's February, Valentine's Day. We felt this is
Ah,
something a lot of folks think about around this time of year, and we thought this would be a perfect time to go through the movies that shaped us over the years in terms of our feelings about love, meaning of love, romance, all those different things. Obviously, this is a really popular film genre of the romance film. We thought this would be a great time to start talking about this. And for me, like I'll start with kind of my framework, and then I'd love to hear with you, Karan. And I think it's essentially sort of what I talked about in the intro here. It's like thinking about the movies that I associate with capturing different aspects of what love is. I mean, love is obviously something that's a pretty big topic, a lot of different facets of that. I don't think anyone can really define what love is, but there are some key components of that for me, there's definitely several films that either capture that really well or make me feel like it sort of reflects on different relationships that I've had or parts of my life that I've encountered love and how that's changed over the years as well. So that's sort of how I approached my top three, which we'll get into in a sec. But yeah, I'd love to hear, Karan, like what your framework was.
yeah, pretty much the same. I guess the only thing I would add to that is I tried to, look at myself at different points in life and tried to pick movies that represented that meaning of love from different times of my life a little bit. And then the other thing, I also sort of tried to do is that I tried to bring along movies that I still actually watch and I can almost sort of look at my old self
Ah,
watching those movies and connecting to them, but the movies still feel enjoyable and fun today because I didn't want to put movies that were just so much of that time that I don't
mm-hmm.
even want to revisit. So that's sort
Right.
of another qualifier that I added because there are several movies that represent that same tone, but there are some in that bucket that I just can't even watch anymore because they're just bad or what have you. So those are not coming to the grave.
Got it. Got it. No, that's an interesting thing to think about. It's like too, I don't want to say like too painful to go back and feel those things again, but maybe it's like, oh, I can't believe that was something that I liked or enjoyed. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, a
Because you've
little bit the
changed so much.
quality of the
Oh, the
movie as
quality.
well,
Okay.
right? Like I've changed and know much more about the movies, and I
Ah,
think this is such a personal topic that I felt like I would be disingenuous if I were putting a movie about love like right now in 2022
hmm.
that I just didn't even care about anymore,
I see.
even though it
Yeah.
meant something back in the day.
No. That yeah, it's like it no longer is shaping you, so it doesn't isn't
No.
really something that you felt worthwhile. Cool. Well, yeah. Why don't we then jump into the discussion? I'd love to start with yeah, your number three of the movie that shaped your love.
Okay, so my number three is this movie called The Holiday from 2006. The quick log line on the movie is two women troubled with guy problems swap homes in each other's countries where they each meet a local guy and fall in love. Directed by Nancy Myers, starring Kate Winslet, Cameron Diaz, Jude Law, Jack Black, Eli Wallach, a whole bunch of people. So let me sort of say up front that this movie is flawed in many ways. Um, I'm a big fan of the Nancy Myers universe.
Hmm.
I don't think this is sort of in her top three because I think the movie has a lot going on, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But why this movie is on my list personally is because I really wanted a movie that represented this feeling of unrequited love. Because I, in my life, I think I had a lot of that where I would sort of, throw my heart out on somebody without even sort of fully understanding what that meant to me, but definitely without understanding what that meant to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in many ways, the Kate Winslet character's journey in this movie is actually quite personal to me, where, you're out there doing all these grandiose acts of love and what have you for the other person who doesn't even see you and doesn't even care about you. So, in the time that I watched this movie, which was like 2009, 2010 or so,
Mm-hmm.
I just remember connecting with that aspect a lot. And sort of really, and this is Kate Winslet, right? She's great at everything she does. So even though this movie is kind of cheesy and corny and such, she makes that pain very real. But then ultimately, what this movie becomes for me is how you then move on from that sort of unrequited love zone that you're in. And, you sort of you meet new people and they kind of become this, balm of joy and fun. And then through that, you start to find who you are and what you actually care about. And the things that you were crying over earlier, or the people that you were crying over earlier, they actually didn't even mean much to you, because you were sort of stuck in whatever version of love or whatever you wanted in your own head. It wasn't real. And it takes you finding you and what do you care about in life and who you are to truly then find somebody that you want to be with, Now, the movie meanders in many other ways as well. But I think to me, the Kate Winslet journey, moving to LA on a whim and sort of trying something new, meeting Jack Black, and then especially meeting Eli Wallach, which to me is the actual love story of the movie. I wish they were together. That sort of, and then she finds herself and she's sort of like Eli Wallach says, you got to be the leading lady of your own movie. And she becomes one, and that to me is an amazing arc. But then in addition to that, this movie I wanted one like sort of Hollywood rom-com movie. This is that. It has all the tropes of, you're in Surrey, you're having meet cutes, and it's a holiday movie as well. So you have all the tropes of, sort of sugar, candy corn, movie romance as well. Right. This is the only one of those movies on my list. Okay. But I think I can watch this movie even today and feel happy and good because it has this very real resonance, with me. Obviously, it's Nancy Meyers, so beautiful homes, good kitchens. And, I have to pause and say a little bit, like, she makes it look so easy, right? Like, this is a director who's made movies that made hundreds of millions of dollars, it's complicated, right? Blah, 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 etc. But, from the classic auteur male-driven point of view, these movies critically were always sort of panned or left aside. But I have to say that it's not easy to make a movie like this and actually resonate and feel so easy and breezy, if you will. So, props to her for doing that. So, yeah, this is sort of my number 3 because, like I said, it resonates in a very particular way with me. And if I can add one more thing, I didn't swap homes with anybody, but me signing up for a cooking class in LA, which I've talked about in a previous episode, plug in for our episode on movies that shaped us becoming foodies. Yep. Was a little bit inspired by this because I was stuck in a rut and I was like, I got to do something that makes me feel me. And I did it and met great friends and kind of life took on a new meaning from there on out. So that's The Holiday. Have you watched this movie?
Yeah, so I had not seen this film before doing this podcast. I had heard about it. Actually, it had been on my list for a while of something to check out just because I'd heard such great things about it. And I am not someone who typically likes Nancy Meyers. I find certain aspects of her films a little problematic sometimes. So that was not necessarily a reason why I was avoiding it. Just wasn't something that was coming up. So I'm definitely glad I finally did see it. And I do feel that the strongest part of this film was definitely the Kate Winslet's arc and her story, about not only like unrequited love, but I think you really hit on it too. It's about like finding herself. And she starts off the film, like frankly, like very pathetic. Like she's a sad sack. She's in love with this guy who has basically been an ex-boyfriend sort of, but he's not really in love with her, kind of using her in a way. And she's essentially also like very down on herself. Like she is kind of using him to feel better about her own writing. Like they're both writers. They work, I think it was a magazine or a newspaper or something. He's always asking her to review his columns. I think that makes her feel important. So she's like getting self-worth through this other person that doesn't love her back. And it wasn't really until she found this, Eli's character, who's an old man, old screenwriter in Hollywood, like this really old guy who lives in the neighborhood that she house swaps into, that in a way, it's almost like he is stuck in a rut too. Like he's a guy who's a very famous in the world of film screenwriter, but he doesn't care anymore. He's kind of like he doesn't want the attention. He's also kind of a sad sack. And in a way, it's like her finding him and then empowering him to then get the credit that he deserves, feel happier in his own life, is able to then her kind of pull herself up and be like, no, I need to do something for me, discover who I am. And then she also kind of pays it forward a little bit to Jack Black too, who's in a similar situation, right? Of his girlfriend that he's dating at the time. He even has this line about like, oh, I think I sometimes question like, why is she with me? Who's like some schlubby kind of guy. She's an actress who's really attractive. So he's also trying to validate himself through the other person, much like Kate Winslet's doing. So when she's able to like overcome her own issues with her unrequited love and then finding herself through Eli, she's able to kind of pass that back on to Jack Black, who dumps his girlfriend initially because she's cheating on him. When she comes groveling back to him, like, oh, let's get back together. I think, the Jack Black at the beginning of the movie probably would have said yes, because he needed that validation. But Kate Winslet really helped him, I think, to realize like, no, this is not a relationship that's actually making me better as a person, which I think is a lot of what love is. It's about finding somebody who makes you into a better version of yourself or helps you do that instead of holding you back. Which I definitely feel Kate Winslet was getting held back by, the guy that she had the crush on that was unrequited, and Jack Black too, just through the girls that he was with. So I kind of gravitated to that storyline much more than that. There was a lot of issues with the Cameron Diaz and Jude Law scenes. I just, felt there was no chemistry or no interest there. And a lot of more telling and not showing when it came to what they were trying to show with what love was there. But Kate Winslet does a fantastic job. And I mean, she's such a great actress all around. And that also, I think why, like, you just make her more believable to me.
Totally.
And everyone's experienced unrequited love at some point too, so you definitely can identify a lot more with that character and what she's going through.
Totally. And also, a bit of an ode to love through the movies. Like it's not, unintentional that you have meet cutes happening. Cameron Diaz cuts movie trailers. Eli Wallach is a screenwriter.
Right.
So I love sort of that nod, especially for me, who was like pretty new in LA at that time. It sort of felt very relevant in that sense as well.
A lot of references to that. No, I'm glad I finally saw it. Again, it had been on my list for a while, and even like in the last couple of months, because it was around the holiday time, it was showing up on recommendations or people saying, "Oh, one of my favorite holiday movies." So while I didn't get to watch it around Christmas time, I'm glad I did around this other holiday time of Valentine's Day.
Sounds good. Well, what's your number 3?
So my number 3 is a film from 2000, High Fidelity, directed by Stephen Frears, starring John Cusack, Jack Black as well. So a little segue on Jack Black here. And Catherine Zeta-Jones. Is based on a Nick Hornbury novel. The IMDb plot is Rob, a record store owner and compulsive list maker, recounts his top 5 breakups, including one in progress. So this is a film from 2000, and I saw this in the theaters in this time. And for me, one of the things that definitely made me want to put this on the list, and something that a reason why this movie affected me a lot of the time is it's a very good encapsulation of like geek culture. I mean, the Rob, who's the main character, John Cusack's character here, is like a music geek. Like he's obsessed with records and always doing lists of records and things.
Yep.
You know, I love music, but more of a film nerd. So I really like identified with that character of like obsessing over these lists. But I think too, like actually looking back on this movie in more recent times since I've seen it, it really, I think, speaks to something that I've come more recently kind of come across in the last couple years, is around like that love can bring maturity, and that sometimes being I guess immature and sort of delayed delayed maturity is something that kind of holds you back from love. So, you know, Rob's character, or John Cusack's character, Rob, in this film is definitely very, very self-centered. All the relationships. So like I mentioned with the log line, he's going over his top 5 breakups of all time. They're all about like why he was with those women. Not anything that they were doing or that he was doing for them. It was like, oh, this is the first woman that I kind of had attraction to. This is a woman I dated because, you know, I was only physically attracted to her. This is a woman that I dated because she was so interesting intellectually. I felt like I could somehow like glom onto some of her intelligence by dating her. So it was a very like self-centered way of looking at it. And it also was a very way of sort of looking at love as something that had to be perfect, of this fantasy. So he definitely is someone who was jumping around these relationships trying to find like the perfect woman to be with that was satisfying all the things on his list that he wanted in a relationship, which is something that, at the time when this was like 20 years ago when I saw this film, that was also how I kind of looked at things, because I was not mature enough to kind of realize the growth that Rob goes through in this film at the very, very end, when it's about, you can't go chase the fantasy. Like nothing's going to be perfect. And it's really like love is less too about what you're getting out of the other person, but what that person can give to you, or sorry, what you can give to that other person. And then what they can give back to you. So there's a lot of moments, especially at the end of the film, where his ex-girlfriend, which is the most recent breakup they talk about, she basically needs him in a moment in the film when her father passes away, and she really needs him to feel something. And because he's able to give that to her, that feeling of just getting over this loss of her dad, I think that really resonates with him. It's like, oh, wow, like this feels good actually when I'm able to help the person in the relationship that I'm in, instead of just sort of taking a lot of things out of it. And then she actually even then returns the favor, and he has a list of like his dream jobs of all time. And these are crazy like fantasy dream jobs of, oh, I wish I was, a record producer in the 60s or Rolling Stone reviewer in the 70s. I mean, things that you can't do, right? Total fantasies. And she basically says, wait, you own a record store. Like, isn't that one of your dream jobs? And he's like, yeah, actually it is. She's like, great, I'm adding that to the list. Now you have your dream job. So she's now helping him realize that, oh, wait a second, I am getting what I want out of things. Like, love doesn't have to be perfect, and neither does, your dream. You actually are living your actual dream job, and not get so caught up in the fantasy. So I really do think that that's something that's important to love as well, and especially the very end of the film. So he does this monologue halfway through about mixtapes. There's a lot of scenes about mixtapes and how, the mixtape is something you're trying to express to the other person, and how to come up with the perfect mixtape. And at the very end of the movie, he's created a mixtape, not of some like his favorite songs, but he's trying to create a list of, or a mixtape for what his now girlfriend, again, he gets her back in the end, what she would want. So he's all of a sudden now focused on her desires and what she wants. And that really, to me, is what shows the maturity that he's in. And, at the time when I saw this, like I kind of didn't catch on to that part of the film just because I was so immature about what relationships should be and what love really is. But now looking back in the years since, because I watch this movie quite often, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, actually. And I'm able to now mature myself like Rob and see a lot of those things more in the film and get those messages away from it, because I've matured a lot myself and in the relationships that I've had, and understanding what love really is. But yeah, it's one of my favorite movies. I recently rewatched it just in preparation for this, and just still blown away how awesome of a film this is, and just great performance all along. But, I think it really does a great job of capturing this fact that, again, love is not, isn't a fantasy, and you shouldn't be chasing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had not seen this movie before. I started watching this movie maybe a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
it was the initial sort of setup of nerd culture. I was like, I can't, this is too much for me. I can't.
Yeah.
I don't want to be with these people.
Yeah.
I was never part of that club, I guess,
Hmm.
growing up and such. So I actually put the movie down. So it was fun to pick this movie back up again after all these years. And you hit it on the head. Like, I think it really chronicles his journey of, getting mature, finding out that love is more than just some fantastical picture that you created in your head. So I think all that was great. um, it moved so nicely, the movie.
Hmm.
And this is, I was thinking about this, like Stephen Frears, I think it's one of his gifts as a director. Like all of his movies, they end up kind of tackling lots of different themes,
Hmm.
sometimes that are about royalty or what have you, but they have this very easy kind of way of getting along, uh, while keeping it entertaining and also keeping it interesting,
Hmm.
and light. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Um, the two things that sort of still sit with me that I'm wrestling with a little bit is, number one, John Cusack's casting. Like, I don't know how old he is. To me, he looks like a 40-year-old man. And maybe
Mm.
that's the point. But that sort of, as a whole other element to the movie, that, oh, you still have not matured even though you're so old.
Right.
Uh, and I don't know if this is what they were going for, but he just looks really old to me. And then the second one, which probably is the bigger one to me, is that I don't think the girl comes back. um, I think there's still a lot more learning that has to happen and maturity that has to happen at the end. And I would have felt, and maybe this is just, watching this movie now for the first time in the times we live in.
Mm.
So it's obviously coloring my perspective quite a bit. But to me, it would have felt a lot more believable if she just wanted to engage and talk to him and hang out, as opposed to moving back in and, oh, suddenly this is like a full on relationship. That to me felt a little bit odd because the rest of the movie feels very realistic, actually.
Hmm.
So I found that part a little bit unbelievable. But the theme that you're hitting on, Alex, like I really connected with that. Like we've all had this journey of some sort of ideal, perfect person to be list that we made in our head. And it takes a bit to go through life and realize, A, that doesn't exist. And B, you probably don't even want that person.
Right.
Even
Right.
if that person existed, which by the way doesn't,
Hmm.
you have to figure out who you are. And because a relationship by definition is about two people,
Right.
not one person. Otherwise, you could just hang their picture on the wall and be in a relationship with the picture. So, but yeah, very glad I watched this movie, and also a great time capsule to the 2000s.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Clothes and the
I love that.
hair,
Yeah.
Catherine Zeta-Jones, like she looks incredible. So good.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. And the thing about the age, I mean, I actually don't know how old John Cusack was at the time. And when I saw this movie, I was, 18 or something. So
Right,
whatever he was looked, like late 20s, early 30s or whatever.
right.
But, I think that does really say something about, the delayed kind of transition into adulthood. And also too, like even if he was in his 40s, I think, and I think in the film, he's supposed to probably be in his late 20s, like early 30s. But that it can really happen at any time, like that
Sure.
growth moment that he has, and that you're always still growing and maturing, and and yeah, maybe too, like that culture that he was in, that geek culture was maybe holding him back a little bit because he was obsessing over these things. And I think that is also just sort of a lesson of this movie as well. Of you can still appreciate the music, but it doesn't always have to be about you and like these obsessive lists and things, and that I think was holding him back a little bit. But again, at the time, like that was what was related, like I related to, because I also
Yeah.
love making lists, and there's all the dialogue that he had in that record store with his friends, would be the same dialogue I'd have. That was in college. I was beginning to go into college at the time. Like that was, hanging out with my friends in college and high school was the same kind of stuff. Oh, what are your top 3 this or your top 5 this? And it was all that. So those scenes like were very, authentic and kind of made me identify a lot with the Cusack character. But, again, now I can kind of look back and see, oh yeah, like I identify with that portion of it, but now also with his emotional growth and the things that he needed to learn. I've definitely like learned a lot of that along the ways myself, much like he did in the film. And, I do think the ending, I like that yeah, she does go back to them, but it's not something where like, okay, now they're getting married or it's some, magical kind of like Hollywood ending. Very ambiguous about, no, he's learned stuff. He has in the last 10 minutes of film grown is what he needs to do. And he grew. And now hopefully he's going to live a more fulfilling life, whether it's with her or someone else. So that I always resonated with me too, that the ending wasn't some like, oh, I'm proposing. Okay, great. Let's get married. And now everything's perfect. Not at all. It's very much like, who knows what can happen, but at least now he's, made this step.
Yeah, it's happened with him. I think I would have just appreciated a little bit of more character development on her part.
Sure. Yeah.
To kind of show that ambiguity that, yeah, I appreciate your growth and I want to be a part of it, but I'm also a little bit hesitant.
Right.
Because I've seen what's happened so far. And, this is very typical of a lot of movies from that time and even now where, a lot of characters and often the female characters, they're not fully developed.
Right.
And, I think about if this movie was written now by someone like Greta Gerwig or Olivia Wilde, where every fringe character has agency and is fully fleshed out, this movie would be a whole other level movie. But at the same time, it speaks to something very personal and it is his journey. He is the protagonist of the movie. So that's what it's about.
Yeah, he speaks in the first person to the audience. I mean, it's kind of tough. It's clearly through everything is through his point of view, more so than the others. And two, well, as we move on to then your number two, I want to call you out a little bit because you said, oh, this, like the geek culture thing turned you off, and now you're on a podcast where you're ranking your top 3 movies. So. Welcome to the club, buddy.
I know. No, and it was sort of more of an in the moment thing.
I know.
They said, I'm sort of, if not an official card holder, definitely an unofficial card holder of the club.
Yeah, but at least they're making
enjoyed, huh?
At least they're making a list club. You're in that now officially.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. No, but watching the movie again, as in like fully, properly this time, I actually really got into the 3 friends and also like, just it made me nostalgic for music stores and the whole vibe of that time. And it's sort of sad that, we don't have these physical spaces where you could hang out with people on common interests and get into it. I mean, of course, nerd culture exists in a totally different way, but there's something special about these places, which don't exist anymore.
Totally. Cool. So yeah, what is your number 2 film that represents the meaning of love to you?
Okay, so my number 2 is this movie called The Phantom Thread from 2017, and the logline is set in 1950s London. Reynolds Woodcock is a renowned dressmaker whose fastidious life is disrupted by a young, strong-willed woman, Alma, who becomes his muse and lover. Directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Daniel Day-Lewis, Vicky Krieps, Leslie Manville, a whole bunch of other people. So I put this movie on my list because this is sort of my like grown-up romance movie, at least how I look at love like now. When I watched this movie, initially it obviously wowed me and I really enjoyed it, but I think it's developed a lot more relevance for me over time. And here's why. I think this movie does a great job of showing a person who's a little bit crotchety, who is a very particular person, has a very set life. And I can relate to that. And I also sort of spend a lot of my time, sort of not being in a full-on relationship or, dating people, not quite sort of finding the right person or the right dynamic and sort of moving on from there. And I sort of feel that dichotomy in this character of, yeah, I don't want my world to be messed up, but also deep down, they're very scared and almost sort of like, oh, what if I'm the problem? What if I would never meet anybody who will meet me where I am? Or maybe I've become so used to my own life that I can't even make room for somebody else. So it's a very sort of complicated thing that you don't want, loud noises of butter being applied onto the toast but at the same time, you're kind of scared that what if I'm left alone eating breakfast for the rest of my life, you know? And that's sort of a very real thing that a lot of people feel. And I felt that. And I think this movie is about that, but then it's about meeting your own match, which is not to say somebody who gives it to you right back. That could be one form of it. But I think what I love about this movie is these are two people who are strong-willed for sure, but they come together and sort of figure out their own love language. And I think this is a movie about, yeah, love is hard to kind of get into, and you might have the initial attraction and resonance, but when it comes to really forming a relationship with somebody, it takes adjustment, it takes work. But then when you find that love language with each other, it's pretty wonderful. You know who you are, you know what your shortcomings are, and you're willing to give in to the other person to kind of take you for a ride, and the net sum ends up becoming positive, as opposed to you just looking at your own single-minded view of life, kind of similar to Rob, if you will. But this is sort of, we're almost like meeting Rob after, I don't know, 20 more years, and he's sort of just been single in his music store so far. And the learning wasn't good enough that he still fumbled and finally meets somebody 20 years after who really shows him, and he's ready to be shown as well. So that's why this movie resonates. Obviously, it's a PTA movie, so like we've talked a lot on this podcast, it's exquisite mise-en-scène. All departments working in harmony, as always. Johnny Greenwood's score,
Fantastic.
Cinematography, super layered performances by everybody. We'll get into that. But I think there's another layer here, which is PTA has not done a movie about beauty like this before. I was very curious when this movie was announced that he's going to be in the fashion world, and what would that be? So I think that's another layer to this whole, the aesthetic of the movie. And obviously in pure PTA fashion, it's just so detailed in the clothes and how the construction is happening, the seamstresses, and the whole sort of background is just so lush and rich. And if you remove that, this movie doesn't work, because they're all very much part of Daniel Day-Lewis's character and why he is the way he is, the relationship with the sister. It's just so rich. I also love that this is like PTA's transition movie, I feel like, from angry boy movies into something a little bit sweeter, something a lot funnier, actually. You still have an angry boy,
right?
May I say an angry, hungry boy, as the movie says, at the center of it. But it's almost like he is growing, PTA is growing himself. And it's so fun to watch Licorice Pizza as after this movie, which is so light and just funny and effervescent. So it's such a great parallel to his journey as well. This was actually, I think this has been my favorite PTA movie in a way, even though I admired There Will Be Blood and The Master that we talked about recently a lot. But it's hard to love those movies. This is a movie that, because there is love in it, it's still complicated, but there's love in it. So yeah, I really enjoy this movie. I watched it several times. It's quirky and peculiar and kind of dark. And, though me and my boyfriend, we're not making like poisonous mushroom omelets for each other.
I was going to ask. So yeah, thanks for saying that.
But I think we do have that sort of feeling of figuring out, or have figured out, our love language, and I think I'm for the better of it, and I'm starting to recognize, or have recognized, my quirks and particularities, and so has he. That is sort of being in love with somebody, is that you hold their hand and you go through all of it, the ugly and the nice. So yeah, that's my number 2, Phantom Thread.
Yeah, this is I'm glad we're talking about this movie. I think it's very unique in terms of what the angle that it addresses love and the theme of love, because it definitely is a love story, like you said. to me, I see this as a lot around the power dynamics of a relationship and of love. So, he's this guy who's a world-renowned dressmaker. He has full power. He's like a dictator at his office. Everyone's afraid of him. He can say whatever he wants. But now, and he meets this woman who was a waiter. So she is like subservient in her work, right? She's helping other people. Like she has no power or agency at her job. She's the worker, whereas he's like the owner of his company, right? But I feel like because of his love for her, he allows her to have power over him. And that's something that he craves, even though he doesn't get it anywhere and he likes to in his work life be the one in control. But because of the love for her that he has, he lets her in and lets her get that power over him, which she also likes. And there's this their love language seems to be a lot about like who's the nurturer and who's the one who needs to be nurtured. And there, once she starts poisoning him, which basically like breaks down his shell into this sickly, almost dying person that desperately needs her, like a baby, right? He's reversing back to a baby, and there's this whole subtext too of his mother that they deal with. So he clearly has mommy issues. So he basically reverts back to a baby, and then she's able to nurse him back to health. And that's really what I think he craves more than anything else. It's to be nurtured, and she craves to then be the nurturer. And the fact that they're able to find that dynamic in a way that is unhealthy because she is actually poisoning him, but that works for them. Like at the very end of the movie, like he knows he's eating something that's going to make him sick. He knows what she's doing. It's not a surprise. You are poisoning me. You are making me weak. But that is how you're expressing love. And that's the love that I need. It's like they both work out what each of each other needs in the other person. And it just happens to work. Like she's the perfect match for him, like you were saying, because she's the one who desperately is willing to actually poison the person that she's in love with so that she can then nurse him, because she needs to be the nurturer and he needs to be the one that is the baby again. Which is kind of hard. Like it's a very hard movie to watch in that sense, because in a way you can view this as a toxic relationship, like she's actually poisoning the guy, but there is really true love there. I mean, who else would you let poison you knowingly but someone that you're madly in love with? I mean, it's that does speak to how this film, I think, just expresses love in a very unique way through this dynamic of power and control in a relationship.
Totally. I also think, I mean, had you watched this movie before, by the way?
Oh, yeah. So I saw this film in the theater when it came out. I was not it was a little, like we mentioned on the previous podcast, like P.T. Anderson, I'm not a huge fan of, and his later works have been a little bit like hard to kind of crack. So this film took me a while to appreciate it. I definitely was kind of off-put by it, I think, just because his character's so annoying and negative, and the dynamic in there I just felt was too toxic, and I couldn't really see the love that was underneath it. So it kind of took me, especially now, like looking at it really through the love lens for this episode, helped me kind of appreciate, this is what it's trying to say. And I do believe power dynamics in a relationship are definitely a part of love, and letting your guard down and breaking down your shell for the right person. And that's definitely a sign of love.
Now, I asked the question because I think it took me a little bit too. I bet if you watch it again after this watch, at least for me, the poisoning kind of became very, very metaphorical and not literal at all. Versus the first couple of times, it was a very literal thing, and it shocked me and made me very uncomfortable and unsettled. And it's funny how, as I watched the movie over and over again, and maybe I've grown as well in that time, I don't even look at that as an actual act, that anything is even happening. It feels very metaphorical. And like you said, it's just purely an instigator of that power shift.
Right.
And a way for them to just negotiate that with each other, which it's sort of heightened with this poison thing. But if you look at it in relationship, we're doing that constantly, Do you want to go and hang out with these people or no? Right. Are we going out to this fancy dinner place or no? Or should we just walk around the block? We're constantly negotiating in some way or the other. And at first it can be jarring and even sickly, like in this case. But over time, that negotiation sort of just becomes part of being with somebody.
Right.
That's sort of how this movie sits on me now, as opposed to how it did earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is shocking, I guess you could say. Like, when you first seen it, it's like, wait a second, what's going on? It's like, oh my gosh, like, where is this
Yeah.
going to go? But then you're right. It is definitely like a metaphor for that power dynamic. And it's what he needs. I mean, at the end of the movie, he's eating that poisoned omelet. And
Yeah.
it's clear, like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting my whole life to find someone who can poison me in this way. I mean, it's sort of what I'm reading in his face.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what, love can be. It's like the one person that he'd allowed to do that with is the one he should be with. I mean, they definitely, and both, serve each other in that way too. Like, she, as someone who in the beginning of the movie, again, as a waitress, like, she's needing to serve someone. And now it's like someone who she can nurse back to health from being almost dead to this position of absolute power in this industry. I mean, that makes her feel good. And that's how she expresses love, to bring this man back up to where, the world wants him to be. I mean, that's how she that's what she gets out of the relationship. So they're both winning here. It's not not like one's having power over the other. It's just like the back and forth between that is what makes this film so fascinating. And to your point too, I think the more you see it, I can, at least for me, like, kind of get around some of the things that were a little shocking and odd in a romance movie, to have the romantic leads, poisoning one of them poisoning the other one out of love. But yeah, I think it definitely starts unveiling its layers of what the film's trying to say, which is some pretty deep stuff in terms of relationships and love. So my number 2 film is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind from 2004. This is a film directed by Michel Gondry, starring Jim Carrey, Kate Winslet, her second appearance on this episode so far, written by Charlie Kaufman. Logline is, when their relationship turns sour, a couple undergoes a medical procedure to have each other erased from their memories. So this is I saw this film when it came out in 2004, really resonated with me a lot then, and still does, but in little different ways. So I'm a huge fan of the screenwriter, Charlie Kaufman. I think this film is very odd, like most of films are. So to expand a little bit on the log line, essentially it's a sci-fi movie because there's this company that you can go to that allows you to erase select memories from your mind if you don't want to have them anymore. And Jim Carrey, who's the male lead in this film, realizes that his girlfriend, who they've basically been fighting and about to break up, she had that procedure, so erase their relationship from her mind as a way to get over him. And now he, in retaliation, is like, oh, I want to go and do the same thing then. Like, forget this thing ever happened, this relationship they were in. And then you see, like, as the memories start getting erased, he realizes the good memories are getting erased too, and then doesn't want that to happen and starts panicking and trying to reverse the process in his own mind. It's kind of hard to do it justice unless you see it. But what I think this film captures really well is that, relationships, there's going to be the good and the bad. And even ones that don't work out in the end, the things that you get out of that relationship and the growth that you have are the good things and the bad things in that relationship. And you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater just because, the relationship went sour and, this is a mistake. And I didn't learn anything from this person. What did I do? And have all these feelings of regret. It's like, no, even the ones that don't work out, there is really important things in there that you shouldn't forget, because that lived experience, whether it worked out in the end or not, or whether you're with the right person or not, is what life is all about, those lived experiences. And I think that's really what Jim Carrey is starting to realize halfway through the film, and trying to then reverse this memory loss that he's, this memory procedure that he's undergoing, because he realizes, even though, he didn't end up with Clementine and they had this relationship that didn't work out, like, he doesn't want to erase her because those memories are still good. And those things that they did in the past are still important. So I think what that is something this film does very well. And the second thing that resonated with me more so recently is this idea of a little bit of like destiny and, predestination, at the end of the film, Jim Carrey does actually get the memory erased with her, but they have another chance encounter again, and again start dating. So it wasn't necessarily the circumstances at the exact time, who they were at that moment in their first go around that brought them together. But those two people meeting again, boom, all of a sudden they're in a relationship again. And there's a subplot as well of one of the workers at this company. She has an affair with one of the scientists, and he then erases her memory because, I guess they break up. It's kind of unclear why he does that, but her memory gets erased and she falls in love with him again. So I think what this now touches on to me is this feeling of like that, love and attraction. There is something that is very, there's a little bit of destiny in there, or something that's kind of unexplained attraction you can have to somebody else that isn't something you can just erase. Or if you do erase all your experiences, it comes back because it's something that is just innately there. With this person that you have some sort of like, spiritual connection to, even if you erase everything else, it's still there and left. And that's something that is resonating with me more recently, of like just another layer of what this film, I think, does a great job of commenting on love. Not only you need to have the good with the bad, but there is this idea that you can have these connections with people that are just there, that you kind of can't get rid of. Even if you erase all your memory of this person, you're still connected to them in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such a powerful movie. I'd watched this when it came out, or maybe a little bit after it came out, and loved it. Hadn't seen it since.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I'd forgotten a lot about it. So I was so happy to revisit it. Everything you touched on, and I don't know, to me too, it resonated with me in a very personal way. Because as when I started dating Robert, after a little bit, I moved to New York, and we sort of just said, okay, this will be what it'll be. And, but in my gut, I always felt that there was more here, that you couldn't just walk away. And the fact that we then found our way back to each other in a way. So it was funny that as I was watching this movie resonated with me in a very personal way, that, oh yeah, like you said, the people that you're meant to be with, not to get too corny with it, but there is something to that. Of course, anything can happen, because in the case of the Kirsten Dunst character, it doesn't work out. Like, she falls in love back with him, and it gets pretty messy and ugly. And I'm so glad that they had that in the movie, because when I first saw it, I was like, this is a distraction. Like, I don't want to, be with these people. But at the end of the movie, I was glad that he had that in his script, because at the end of the day, he's a romantic, but he's also a realist. He's more of a pessimist from the movies that we've seen, Charlie Kaufman has written. So he wanted to have that other layer that, no, it doesn't always work out. And who knows if it'll even work out between Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet.
Exactly.
You don't know that. But there is something about people finding their way back to each other. Also, what a great Jim Carrey performance.
Oh, yeah.
I was just blown away. I mean, I know Kate Winslet got more of the attention, and she's great in it. I always have a thing when she's not speaking British. I don't think she's a good accent actor.
Yeah,
like, I can see words, here and there, whether it's, Fix It Steve from Steve Jobs to whatever. There's always something else creeping up. So I always find it very distracting, or maybe it's in my own head. I'm at the edge of my seat. There she messes.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
But as a pure, fully fleshed out person, and her vibe and her energy, it's obviously spot on as Kate Winslet. But the person who blew me away was really Jim Carrey, who is just incredible in this movie.
No, I agree. Yeah, one of his best performances for sure. And not an actor I actually really like him. A lot of his comedic roles, I never really was drawn to him as a comedic actor, but as a dramatic actor, he's in some of my favorite films. Yeah,
it's just surprising. And again, I guess people didn't take note of that. So also, he looks great in the movie.
Yeah.
I thought he looked really good. I don't consider Jim Carrey to be a good-looking guy at all, but in this movie, I don't know, maybe I guess that's one of my types, I suppose. He looks pretty good in this movie.
Yeah, no, I think he's a good-looking guy. When he's not pulling a funny face, he's got a little bit of a matinee idol look that he can pull off sometimes. But
never thought of him that way before. Yeah, it's good to revisit this one.
Cool. Okay, now I think we want to get into your number one.
Okay, so my number one is Before Sunrise. This is a movie from 1995, and the quick logline is: a young man and a woman meet on a train in Europe and wind up spending one evening together in Vienna. Unfortunately, both know that this will probably be the only night together. Directed by Richard Linklater, starring Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. So this is sort of my grand Hollywood, cinematic, I should say, romance movie. but it is about people talking and walking. So no surprise.
Yeah.
Like, I was sort of pushing myself after I made the list. Like, should I have like a grand, I don't know, Casablanca like movie on my list? And I was like, it's just not me. So this is as far as it gets. Like, it is the biggest meet cute of all time, but it is about something very real, of just people getting to know each other. And I think why this movie resonates with me very personally is when I wasn't in love, this is how I imagined myself falling in love with, that I would just hang out, meet with somebody and just walk around and get to know them. And then, of course, as life went on, my best dates, whether they went somewhere or no, were just two people walking, us walking. That's it. And now that I have been in a relationship, the best days that I have, the best days that we've had, they've been just us walking and getting to know each other, sometimes talking, sometimes arguing, sometimes sharing old stories, sometimes just being quiet, and observing and taking the world and let that sort of wash over you, as opposed to the very carefully planned events or fancy restaurant trips, which can also be very nice. But I think, to me, this is kind of real life in a way of just being with somebody. So that's why this movie has always had a very personal connection with me. It's sort of my, after a hard week, I want to feel cozy, but not in like a, weird, far from reality, fluffy way.
Yeah.
This is the movie I watch because it sort of brings me back to feeling good about life, about the people you love and such. So that's sort of my personal connection with the movie. As far as the movie itself, like, again, this is probably one of my favorite directors, Richard Linklater. Again, there've been some misses here and there, but overall, there is nobody else who can make a movie like this, which is just about talking and make it cinematic, make it feel grounded and real, but at the same time, you're totally leaned in. Nobody plays with time the way he does. And who knew like this movie would become a trilogy, which, I mean, I almost thought of putting the entire trilogy as my number one, because it's sort of a great piece in itself of like how this relationship unfolds and has so much depth in it. But I wanted to put this one because this is where it all started, and this is what in my romantic and real head, I connect with this version of love the most. And it says a lot of deep stuff about these two people. We've been talking a lot about the idea of love and lists and who is your person, right? I think this movie sort of really shows that, where in many ways, Celine and Jesse are similar people. They care about art, they care about the meaning of life and such, but they're also at odds with each other. And there is this very healthy and sometimes unhealthy kind of back and forth power dynamic shift. They push each other's buttons, but they also then renegotiate that contract back to love. It's also, this movie is about falling in love. So, flirting, showing your aspirational self first, but then putting your foot in your mouth as you kind of go along.
Right.
And those proclamations that you made, they come and sort of bite you back in the ass, but you're almost more adorable and lovable for that. So there's just so much going on in this movie. I could talk about this forever, but this is Before Sunrise, my number one.
Yeah, I'm very glad you put this on the list. I had never seen this film before, preparing for this podcast. I'm not a big Richard Linklater fan. I like his more traditional, like A Dazed and Confused and School of Rock, but not necessarily this type of what he does, like Slacker, that type of his film. So I just hadn't seen this. It wasn't like I was avoiding it in particular, but I just had never seen this film. So I'm really glad that I did here. And actually, I'm glad that I did now. I feel like if I had seen this when it came out, mid 90s, or even like when I was in college or something, I don't think I would have enjoyed it or appreciated it in the way that I do now. I think, though, interestingly enough, it did in a way kind of transport me back to what it felt like to be in college and have these sort of like rambly conversations with someone where you both are so young, you don't know anything, but you're also at that age where you think you know everything. So you're just sort of like talking about all these gigantic topics like love and life, even though you barely lived and barely loved, but you feel like that's what I got from Ethan Hawke. Definitely like, oh yeah, I was that guy. Like when I was 20 and 19, like making all these grandiose statements as if I knew anything, even though I knew nothing. So it definitely transported me back to that in terms of the dialogue. But I think the conceit of what this movie does so well is because they meet on a train randomly and they decide, well, let's hang out for a day and then probably just never going to see each other again. It allows for both of them to let their guards totally down, show every part of themselves because they know they're not going to get judgment because the person doesn't, who cares? Like this is a total stranger in the beginning, right? And I think that is a very important aspect of love too. Showing your entire full self, like your entire self to this other person, not fearing judgment, not getting judgment, even like dumb little embarrassing things about yourself, the negative things, the great things, like you're not kind of putting on an act. Like Ethan Hawke, I don't think is really like trying to impress her. He's just like, look, I'll say anything because I don't care. Like, who knows where this will go? And I think that really does capture a really important part of being in a relationship and being in love, and that you feel like you can just say anything to this person. I mean, not because you feel like you're never going to see them again, but I think that using that premise allows for this relationship and this love to be expressed between these two people. Whereas if either of them came in with guards up because they had met, at work and they know I'm gonna have to see this person every day, so I can't really expose myself, they probably never would have found each other, at least as quickly as they do in this film. So I really liked that it touched on that aspect of what love is, part of what love is, which is that, total freedom and safeness to just like expose all these different parts of yourself. And like your inner child, like there's early on a scene where he does talk about this memory of him as a little boy and seeing maybe a ghost of his dead grandmother. And that she really latches onto that, which also like a relationship is a lot about, getting the needs of your inner child met and being open enough to expose that side of yourself to somebody, which is usually something you're trying to hide. Those childhood desires and fears and memories is not something you'd share with somebody. But when you're in love, that's what you do share. And that's what the other person kind of falls in love with in a way too, that inner child of yourself. And, I definitely I've not been in this situation before of, having a moment where like, I'm never going to see this person again. So I'm just going to say kind of whatever I want. But I definitely can say like, relationships are getting to that point of where you do feel like you can expose all these parts of yourself because you're not afraid about judgment because there is that love there. So I do feel like I would not, because I've recently, as I've had, more experience with love, realized these things, that if I'd seen this movie when I was in college, or at the time, it would have been like, this is just a bunch of like nothing. This isn't like what is going on here. I wouldn't have understood that, I think. So I'm definitely glad in a way I waited and I did really enjoy the film actually. And I wanted to immediately go off and watch the other two, which I haven't yet, but I definitely will. Like it intrigued me enough to be like, I want to follow these characters and see kind of what else he's going to say with them about what love is. But, I think this film does a really good job of capturing that, that moment.
Yeah, no, I guess I was the weird child who sort of always sort of, engaged like this. So to me, this spoke to me even back then, even though I had no idea about love or life or anything, but it sort of felt like, oh, this is how I should be. I still, there's something about Ethan Hawke, as pretentious and sometimes annoying that can be, but there's something about him that draws me in. Just the way he expresses himself, even in real life. And I think this movie obviously is a extension of, him and her, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah. And to your point of kind of letting the guard down, for good or for bad, I feel like I've sort of let more of my guard down when I'm meeting people, especially in a romantic connection. And I don't know if this is because this is what I took away from the movie or this is just who I am. So that sort of has felt pretty relevant to me, even though there was no conceit or premise of like, oh, I'm never going to see this person again.
Right.
I sort of want to get to the depth of who I am and who you are pretty quickly, because otherwise I'm like, why are we even here? It's sort of how I've approached life. And of course, it's not always been, very nice to me
Sure.
in
Yeah.
seeing life that way. But it's sort of, it's funny you pointed that out. And it made me realize why I maybe love this movie, because I actually do approach love and life like that, have very few guards up, to my own fault. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. No. When did you first see the movie, by the way? I'm just curious. Or how did you see this?
Not when it came out, for sure. I think I watched it in the 2010s.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other films the second one had come out at that point, but not the third. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. And the other two are worth watching, it sounds like that.
Oh, they are amazing. In fact, a lot of people like the second one even better than the first one.
Okay.
But they're all amazing. And it's funny, like the themes that we've been hitting through our list, those three movies, the package will hit a lot of those, because you really see these people go through a journey. All right. What's your number one?
Cool. So my number one film that represents love to me, or the meaning of love, is 2007's Once. This is an independent film out of Ireland, writer-director John Carney, starring the members of a real-life folk rock band called the Swell Season. And the logline is a modern-day musical about a busker and an immigrant and their eventful week in Dublin as they write, rehearse, and record songs that tell their love story. So like I mentioned, this is a super low budget film. I think it was made for like $200,000 or something. All handheld, like digital cameras, back when digital cameras were not what they are today. So it looks like home movies sometimes. And definitely the aesthetic they're going for is very raw, but that's actually what I really love about this movie. It is just a story of these two people, like the logline said, that happen to meet on the streets of Dublin. And both of them are going through romantic issues with their current partners. One of them is in a relationship with a girlfriend who just cheated on him in London. So then he left to go to Dublin. He's the musician. She is an immigrant from, I think it was Czechoslovakia, if I recall correctly. And she left her husband back in that country, but took her daughter with her to Ireland because they were having some marital problems. And both of them just happen to randomly meet on the street and then start making incredible music together. And they kind of fill the gaps that each other one needs. And it's just that the chance happenstance encounter leads to this amazing relationship that they form even only a week, but expressed through song. So it is essentially like a musical. There's a lot of long sequences of full songs that they're singing, not in the singing in the sense of breaking character, but performing music in the film in that sense of it's a musical. But I think because they're able to express these aspects of love through song, it just resonated me a lot more than it through dialogue. It felt a lot more authentic. And it really is amazing to see this relationship between these two people who are total strangers. And it does feel like destiny brought them together, and each of them has exactly what the other person needs to help them in their life and make them into better people. He then writes better songs, is getting more success as a musician. She's getting more of a sense of herself, and then deciding sort of what is best then for her child in terms of with her marriage. And at the end of the movie, they actually don't end up together. Which is, sad as a viewer. Like I always thought the ending was kind of tragic in that sense. Like you want them to end up together and you hope that it'll work out. But it's something where just two people met at the right time. Kind of like with the Eternal Sunshine point there of like destiny kind of brought them together in a way. And just immediately hitting it off with someone and having that connection that you can't really express even maybe just only through music. Which is a more kind of primal way to express feelings. But I just find this movie really powerful, and in its simplicity, it's not trying to do something grandiose. Like you were saying too, this isn't some big, like Hollywood version of a romance. But it feels very true and very raw, and just what it can feel like to have this connection with somebody that is almost impossible to describe.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. So another movie that I tried to watch a few years ago.
Oh, really?
And started it and was immediately sort of drawn in. But then there's something about the lead character as the guy, his like singing, especially when he's like screaming, singing, I was like, okay, I can't watch this now. It's too much.
Too much raw folk power.
Too much raw folk power. And so
Yeah.
I put it away. And I'm so glad that I picked it back up again. I agree with everything you said. It's like super raw. The connection between the two is real. That scene in when they're at this music shop playing the piano, she's playing the piano and he's sort of rendering his half-written song over it. I think that has got to be in the top 3 or top 5 like romantic moments of falling for somebody, where it's so brilliantly done that I don't think even they know it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
It's sort of happening at some subconscious level that they're connecting with each other, but you as an audience can see it. And I think it's just so beautiful. Tragic, obviously, at the end. So I'm so glad I watched it. And despite my comment on the singing, there's some really beautiful songs, especially when he's singing in a lower register. My advice to him would be to stick to that.
Yeah, the soundtrack is great. I definitely something. Once I first saw this movie on DVD, I think about a year or two after it came out, and was just like completely blown away by it, and immediately went out and was listening to the soundtrack. So it is. It's
the main
a great
song is amazing.
Yeah, Oscar-winning main song. Yeah, Falling Slowly, I think is the name of it. Yeah, won the Oscar that year.
No, it's awesome. My only sort of slight nit, and again, it's funny, you had 2 movies on your list that I had never seen before, so I'm watching them now with fresh eyes in this time, with all this shared knowledge of just cinema, but also just more years.
Right.
That I sort of felt that, again, she was so great in the movie, and I think the movie is more from his point of view, that I wanted more of her. Because her kind of like no guards up at all energy of how she approaches him, how free she is, but at the same time has boundaries, is falling for him, but also want to do the right thing for herself and a kid and a life. She's actually the more responsible one, even though on surface she kind of feels all over the place a little bit. It's so genius. I just wanted more of her. I wish we'd spend more time, and the time we spend with her is mostly through song. And I get it, like I think song is a more powerful way of communicating emotion, but at some point maybe 3 songs back to back with like no dialogue and no space at all sort of got to me a little bit, because I mean, I like musicals to a point. I think that's just me bringing my own baggage to it, but I loved when they were kind of mixing in the songs with talking and stuff. So those were my sort of 2 little nits on this movie, but otherwise I loved it. And the movie, though tragic, I do think maybe this is the magic of the music. I do think they come back together at some point. It sort of left me with that feeling that this is not final. To your point, and we've been talking a lot about destiny and meant to be and such. I sort of feel like these people come back together because the lives that they've now chosen to be in, they're not going to fulfill them the way this other life potentially could have. So
you kind of get that a little bit from the last shot of the film, which I really love is a camera pulling out of her in her apartment playing a piano that he gave to her because she couldn't afford a piano, and the camera kind of pulls back. She's in there, you see in the frame of her and her husband and her kid, and then she sort of like looks out the window kind of longingly for like, I don't know, it's like, what have I done? But just I think imagining, like you said, what would that other life had been like? And her being in that window just seems sort of trapped in her current life as the camera's like being this free moving camera, this big crane shot, or I don't know how they did it, but pulling back out of this window of this longing of like, what choice do I make? But I think it's a juxtaposition too of like this feeling of destiny of Destiny and chance brought them together. They had this powerful connection expressed through music, but it's the choices that they then made of, do they act on that or not? Do they take the chance or not? Because I think, I don't believe in predestination in the sense of you have no agency in your own life, but I do definitely think life gives you opportunities, that it's your choice of whether you take it or not. And that's where the destiny is in that choice that you get. And both of them chose, to continue on their normal paths and not like try out, this thing, even though it felt so magical to them and created all these great songs. So I liked that, playing around with that concept. But yeah, who knows? Maybe they do change their mind or something. But I think that's just an important aspect of it.
It is about that pulling camera. I'm so glad you brought that up. That to me, it almost sort of was like life is pulling her out of that trap room in a way. And does she now take this other chance of going back to it? There was something like it was calling her, the way the camera pulls. So that's sort of what made me feel the way I did. So yeah, what a great movie.
Yeah. Now we've done the list, and any like overall thoughts now that we have all the 6 films out there?
Yeah. I thought both of our films touched on very similar themes of like that you as a person would be best set up for finding love and being in love if you find who you are. So a lot of our leading characters go through journeys of sort of doing that, and then this other sort of woven concept of destiny, not predestiny, but just destiny, that life and love will throw chances at you, and it's sort of on you. What do you make of it? And a lot of that has to do with where you are in your own life, in your own journey of how confident you feel about yourself and know what you want and such. And then also just staying with it. There is a little bit of negotiation that it takes to make something work. You can't just erase the bad parts and walk away. You have to give it time, and you have to make it work, And I know work is not a fun word, but love also takes work to a degree. So I feel like all of our movies touch those themes. I also love that our movies were not sort of grand Hollywood romantic tales, that they were pretty grounded as much as possible. In fact, I can see our number 2s and 3s and 1s, being companion pieces, like Phantom Thread and Eternal Sunshine are kind of twisty, quirky, kind of weird movies, versus Once and Before Sunrise are very kind of real, let's see these people get to know each other and talk and see how love unfolds. So I love that juxtaposition as well. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought a lot of the same things, especially that in each of these films, that is about the characters who are in love, like finding themselves first. And I think that, to your point, yes, love and relationships are work, but a lot of that work, I think, is on self-discovery and understanding oneself. That is most of the work that is involved in that. I also did think it was interesting that none of these films, the most Hollywood quote unquote ending was probably The Holiday, but even that didn't end with some big wedding, or you don't know if any of these people are actually staying together. I mean, honestly, I feel like Jack Black and Kate Winslet there was no chemistry or romance between them whatsoever. So I feel like that's going to last the night. But that, I thought that was very interesting, that the rest of these films were, all these ambiguous kind of endings. And I think that is a lot of what, relationships and love is. It never is. There's not like a period where, okay, it's done, check the box, you're in the relationship, it's over. No, that always continues to evolve. You never know what's going to happen. And that both people in the relationship will continue to grow and change, and that love is that constant thing. And it's not a moment that, okay, there's the big wedding scene, and now, cue the, big score, and now the end, the happily ever after, right? None of these films ended with a happily ever after at all. And I think that's probably also why none of these films are old films. They're all from within the last, 20, 25 years. And I think a lot of classical Hollywood films are much more about that, like archetype, Hollywood, Hollywood ending basically, right? Of the, happily ever after. And then none of us kind of put neither of us put any kind of film like that on the list. I think it's just telling to maybe just a better understanding and reflection of what love is in modern films versus what they were doing in those classical romances, which I still really love. I mean, Casablanca is great and, what have you, but Dr. Zhivago, et cetera. But I think these films deal with love in a much more mature way. And I think that's why they resonated with us. So, and it was a very, very good list for both of us.
I think so too. So you mentioned two movies that you were presumably thinking of. What were some other movies that didn't make your list?
Yeah. There were a couple older movies for me. Actually, just Brief Encounter, which you already mentioned. Other movies on my list were Titanic, Serendipity, Solaris, the Soderbergh remake, Her, and then In the Mood for Love. All recent films, actually.
Wonderful list.
What about you?
I had Sense and Sensibility, Harry Met Sally, one old movie, The Clock, starring Judy Garland. And I don't think it's a happy ending movie, and it is a very much a shot in the day, walking, talking kind of.
Oh, cool. You never heard of that. I'll have to check it out.
Check it out. All right. So I guess that's our episode then.
Yeah, well, I hope all you listeners enjoyed the Valentine's Day themed episode on love. Thank you all for listening. And that, we're available on all major platforms. Please make sure to review and rate us. And also don't forget to subscribe and, tell friends and family about the episodes if you enjoy, and hope you continue to enjoy what we have up in store for you in the coming episodes. See you later.
Bye.